Following is a republishing of an incredible episode with my friends at Gould Farms. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have today my guests, Lisanne Finston and Jane Lindsley of Gould Farm, one of the sponsors here on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Guy.
All right. So, Lisanne Finston is the executive director. She came to Gould Farm after 20 years serving as executive director of an innovative anti-hunger organization serving people with mental health and addiction challenges in New Jersey. She received her MSW from Rutgers University and her Master's of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. Lisanne values the pioneering model practiced at Gould Farm that blends old-fashioned life-enhancing work with the best in clinical practices to support healing and recovery. Jane Lindsley is the clinical director. Jane's been working in the field of mental health and addictions for over 30 years and on the Gould Farm clinical team since 2004. She's been clinical director of the team since 2006. As a graduate of Smith School for Social Work, Jane is licensed in social work and addictions with additional certifications in both trauma and women's relational theory of mental health. All right. That's just a little bit about you folks. Let's, before we dive in here, just give our listeners a brief, share with them where each of you are from specifically, originally. Then we'll get going here.
Go ahead, Jane. Originally, I grew up in Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay. Nice. East Coast. I'm East Coast as well.
Yep.
And currently you're both at Gould Farm right now? Okay. And share with the listeners where that is from, where you guys are right now.
Specifically, we're in Western Massachusetts, a small town called Monterey. Okay. And we both live here, as does all of our staff. We all live and work on a 750-acre farm.
Okay. So, before we started recording, I was sharing with you, how I found you guys and invited you to be a sponsor on this podcast. And like I was saying, I'm trying to bring on sponsors who really fit with, what's important to me and what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And one of the things that really jumped out at what you're doing at Gould Farm, and Gould Farm is the first residential community in the nation dedicated to helping adults with mental health challenges, was this sense of kind of anti-stigma. You're working with trauma. People who are there are working on the farm. There seemed to be a real honoring of people and who they were and getting them involved. I just love that sincerely. So I just want to put that out there. We can talk more about that, but talk to our listeners a little bit about what Gould Farm is.
Sure. So Gould Farm has been around since 1913 and was founded out of and as part of what often is described as the moral treatment movement, and really grew out of the founders' vision and commitments to serving people who were on the margins of society at the time, from a real holistic approach, bringing people to the outdoors, to nature, to heal within a context that's both beautiful and and also, bringing people together into a community of family and friends with a sense of belonging and connection to each other that was representative and reflective of their faith backgrounds at the time. And so really Gould Farm kind of emerged in the midst of and out of, I think, what today we now understand to be, the best practices, if we want to call it that, of what helps all of us to feel well and connected and whole. And that is connection to the earth and connection to each other. So it's a recipe and a formula for success that has weathered the test of time, in part because I think we're grounded and rooted in what really is most important in life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, and it's Lisanne speaking, as you were saying that, it sounded to me exactly what people share on this podcast are the fundamental, foundational elements for relationship and healing. Mm-hmm. Jane, why don't you share a little bit about, I guess, your perspective, what Gould Farm is about, and who specifically you folks work with and serve.
Okay. So the population that we work with is deemed people with serious mental health challenges, and also those with co-occurring issues. And I think that has been true right along. And the entire philosophy and the values of the farm, I would say, really haven't changed over the 100 years. I would say that maybe the way we articulate what we do and understand it within a clinical sort of gaze has changed or enhanced. But we are predominantly based on the principle that everyone has something to contribute. So the day that someone arrives, they are able to join a work team and begin to share in the work that keeps 750 acres of farm viable and functional.
Right.
So that sort of groundwork is the basis of where we start.
So just to be clear, your people who are coming there are not solely in recovery for addiction. People who are coming. Okay.
No, actually, that is usually secondary. And often our guests, they vary in how they would articulate recovery. So both from a mental health challenge and an addiction. So some people come having a diagnosis that they completely embrace, and others might articulate the challenges very differently than maybe you or I would as a therapist.
Okay.
And most folks who come here, Guy, are coming from a place of having traditional community-based mental health services really not connect and work well for them. And so folks come to us after having tried inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, a range of different kinds of treatments, and not finding a fit and a consistency and a kind of holistic approach to treatment that enables them to gain the traction to be able to really move forward in their recovery. So people who come here come to us from a bit of a history of challenges and struggles within traditional mental health services and addiction health services, and then come to us for a while. They're usually here for a minimum 6 to 8 months, but often been a couple of years or more, in order to really pull together all of the threads of what enables a person to become more whole and move forward in reintegrating successfully into a community, back to their family and their communities of origin, back to school or work or whatever their dream and their hope and aspiration might be.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to me. Hearing you talk about what people they come to you and immediately they join a work team and they're put to work. I mean, that's very different than community mental health, where come over here and we're going to, with all maybe the best intentions, we're going to do all these things to you oftentimes, right? So right away, you're talking about bringing them in and, having them be a part of something and, having them feel worthy in a sense that they're needed. And, I was working before I went full-time here with this podcast and so forth. I was working in a clinic for 5 years here up in Northern California, and we were assessing and treating kids who were showing early signs of psychosis, most of whom had been traumatized. It was very similar to how you're talking about things here. We did something very similar. Many of the kids, if not all the people who came to us, had gone through and seen many other clinicians and therapists of different kinds and came to us, and it was a very different experience, positive experience for them. Yeah. So, and this is one of the things that really stood out to me in when I found you guys. So let's talk a little bit, if we could, about, let's kind of dial in and get a little more specific. Someone comes to you, what happens? They come to you, walk us through what happens.
Well, the journey begins with our admissions process, and each person who comes to us has a partnership. So what that means is, on a very practical level, it means if this isn't going to work, they have someplace to return to. But on another level, it also speaks to a part of our philosophy, which is a belief that people need to have a network of support around them. And so we begin at admissions to work to include, if a guest will allow it, the family or whatever the partnership is, to be included. They often have a voice that can help inform treatment, and definitely will be a voice that's a strongly viable one when they leave. And so a person will enter in that manner. Then as the family leaves, we have a 2-week period where both the guest and us kind of look at the fit to make sure that it's something that will be of service to them. That we can
just quickly, Jane, what are the ages that you serve?
Only adults. We work with people 18 and over.
Okay.
So then, a person will be assigned a social worker, and that the social worker will sort of accompany them throughout their journey here until they transition to either one of our step downs or back to home. And during the time that they're here, they'll start out on F&G, which is Forestry, Grounds, and Gardens, FG&G. And that's a sort of wide-ranging team that works mostly around the main house. And that in the first couple of weeks enables us to get to know people better. There's there are more work team leaders on that team. So there are more eyes, more presence with people. But people are expected to work a 30-hour week, which is usually quite an adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that structure is really a part of what we're teaching, hopefully, as a transferable skill that, people begin to notice, like they do well during the work program, but have trouble on weekends, which is downtime. So, there's a way in which there's sort of a natural education about what helps and what doesn't, without us having to be proscriptive or prescriptive about it. So they will meet with their clinician twice a week. Also probably during that 30-hour time. And then do you want to speak to Resi and...
Yeah, and so to give you also an idea of the kinds of activities that the Forestry and Grounds team right now is collecting sap. So they're out now. Buckets are overflowing because the sap is running, and so they're collecting sap, and they're up in the sap house, running it through the reverse osmosis machine and boiling it down into maple syrup. And people are really excited about being out in the woods in this beautiful weather. It's 60 degrees the last couple of days here in the Berkshires. Spring, signs of spring are all around, and so that work piece is really important because people are immediately joining into an activity that benefits the whole community, and they see the immediate results, and they feel like they're part of something, and they're tapping into their strengths. Hauling those buckets of sap, I can tell you, is no easy feat.
Right.
And so people, in morning meeting this morning, we're talking about a special sap collection yesterday on Sunday, and how people really enjoyed being out in the woods and together with other people and participating in this activity. And participating together in activities outside of work is another piece of what is really central to the program and to life here at the farm. People spend evenings. We have 3 guest houses where we call, by the way, our residents guests. That dates back to the early days of the program. Where Agnes and Will Gould received people here at the farm and called them their guests and welcomed them into a community of belonging. So evenings in the house, our residential team are supporting guests, helping them to feel connected to each other. They may be sitting around and talking in the evenings, or playing games, or working on keeping their rooms clean and supporting good hygiene and those kinds of things. And one of the centers of what happens here, and where I think most of our healing really happens, is in the dining room during meal times. You want to say more about meals, Jane?
Well, we have 3 meals a day together that are cooked by a kitchen team that is manned also by guests. On Thursday mornings, people get to eat the maple syrup, maybe on Saturdays too. Yep. That's pancakes and French toast.
You're speaking my language here. You had me at maple syrup.
Yeah. Now I just lost my train of thought, but
you were talking about the dining hall.
The dining room it's interesting that Lisanne says it's the center of healing. It's also, it can be quite a challenge. It's probably the only place where maybe the whole community is there. And what that also entails is a number of the staff have children from ages of 6 months up to teenagers. And everyone is at meals often. And this is an old 200-year-old farmhouse. The acoustics can be a challenge. It can be quite loud and cacophonous in there. So I often think of it as a bit of trial by fire. Most of our guests have come to us from, I would say the commonality would be isolation. Whether they have, left school, left some aspect of their lives, whatever the challenges are, have left them fairly isolated. And we counter that probably on every turn. And the dining room is a major example of that because we eat at fairly big tables. I mean, we don't have any place where someone really eats by themselves.
Right. In terms of, my guess is treatment begins from the first contact. And, you're talking here about people joining work groups and lugging things of sap, buckets of sap, all which can be therapeutic in and of themselves. Is a couple questions here. Are the people who on the staff who are running or heading those work teams, are they clinicians, formal clinicians? Are they interact or acting in a clinical way in any sense? Or is it that they're just, doing their job and so forth? I'm trying to get an idea here of the different types of treatment. You mentioned the social workers, touch base with them twice a week. Anyway.
So we'll kind of do this in a couple of parts. So we like to say that we don't have patients at Gould Farm. We have bakers and farmers and cooks and gardeners and trail maintenance folks. We have our staff are really gifted and talented and experienced in all of their varying fields. Again, whether it's farming or baking or our food service manager who manages our kitchen and our cafe. We also have a restaurant that sort of straddles the program and bridges it into the community. Who's an accomplished chef. The people who are generally speaking in our work program are people who are really dedicated to their craft, and they also have a passion for the work that we do here. And so they're really unique individuals in that regard because they bring that, I think, really wonderful blend of skill and heart that, if you want to think about the image of hands and heart, that I think in my many years of experience in the field of helping professionals, I've been hard pressed to find people of this caliber anywhere else. Wow. It's really quite remarkable. And Jane could say much more about the sort of clinical sort of integration piece and how that happens.
So each of the work leaders, which is the people that Lisanne's speaking of, there are a number of them in each team, and they work as eyes and ears and as part of a treatment team for each guest. So we work pretty hard to implement a way of working as a team that, as much as possible, we talk with the guest as opposed to about them. And to do that, we use a reflective meeting process that's founded on the principles of open dialogue, which is a Finnish model, that has proven to be pretty helpful with enabling a guest to understand our thinking and concerns, as well as our appreciations, and also to help them track their progress through here so that they understand that the skills and the strengths they come with and the skills they develop are actually things that will be transferable when they leave. Learning that structured time is important is, a really valuable lesson to take out of working a 30-hour week. And there are many aspects to that.
The open dialogue model was something that we were using also here in this clinic. Really cool. I'll have that linked up. I just want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Lisanne Finston, Executive Director, and Jane Lindsley, Clinical Director of Gould Farm. So let me ask each of you what brought you here, and I'm really curious. As you talk about that and reflect about that, how your own personal perspective on therapy has shifted and changed.
Well, you've been here longer than me, so I'll let you go first.
Okay. I have been here about 15 years. And I came... It's a model that I had heard about while working inpatient about, an hour from here. And also when I was attracted to the model in part because I felt really strongly that though I worked in probably one of the last hospitals that had a milieu program where we all shared thoughts and feelings 3 or 4 times a day, and people stayed more long-term. As insurance governed more of that, it felt more and more like I was part of a revolving door. And the farm offered something different. And what I've come to appreciate is that for probably 18 hours a day, we have people interacting together. So we have perspectives on people that I only could have imagined.
Right.
It's not just my perspective, it's that of, the entire community if I need it, but often specifically the team that works with, lives with, interacts with this person. And it gives us a really, for want of a better word, holistic view of a person's progress and their strengths and abilities. So, what I've come to realize is I don't ever want to work as a solo member of in treatment with someone. That for me, the importance of a team and multiple voices is profound.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. How about for you, Lisanne?
Yeah, well, I came from sort of almost the opposite sort of end of the spectrum to Gould Farm from Jane's experience. So I was working in a community-based organization for the last for 20 years, working primarily with people who were homeless, many of whom were people who were outside of mental health treatment and with co-occurring substance use challenges, and in addition to poverty, and really experienced not only the brokenness of the system, but the brokenness of families, and how illness and addiction ravaged families. We would have parents from neighboring communities come and knock on the back door of our building, looking for their loved one who they hadn't seen in months or years, hoping for some word that they were around and they were okay. So coming from that place, I've always sort of been interested in healing and how we sort of pull together and move beyond the kind of fractured systems of care and support in communities. And I also come from a clergy background, and so I kind of bring a blend of this sense of healing and helping and how that's connected to a deeper kind of spiritual reality. And this idea of belonging is really important to me. And I think also my personal experience as a lesbian who has felt rather stigmatized and marginalized by the church that I, set out to serve. I think that I had heard also about Gould Farm from a colleague of mine whose son worked here and had turned me on to the place. And so I found it to be a kind of a homecoming, if you will, in a sense, in terms of the things that were important to me and mattered, and vocationally were things that I was pursuing in life. So I packed up my family and here we are. We've been here 6 years, a little over 6 years. And I think my teenage kids are still wondering what the heck I was thinking. But yeah, so I think, being here this time, I have to say it's really challenging. It's really, being a part of a community is something that really, it taps into a deep place in all of us, both the good and the bad and the ugly. And it really, it taps into, I think for me and I think for others, a place that's reminds us that connection and relationship are so important because we grow and we change and we become in the process of building and forging those relationships in a real way that just can't happen in many other settings. So it's a very special place in that regard.
A lot of people who are listening to this are therapists of various kinds, advocates, coaches, teachers, etc. And I know that there are people out there going, "Oh my God, this sounds amazing! I'd love to work there," but also thinking maybe about certain clients they have that might be appropriate. Talk a little bit about who's a good fit for this program, and how people go about maybe contacting you, etc.
Okay, so I can start that dialogue. A good fit would be someone over 18 who has a diagnosis or I would say a diagnosis. Most people come to us having been diagnosed with a major mental health challenge. And ideally, it's someone who is able to function in an open setting. And what that means is we are big and spread out. We have no locks. We are not a locked unit. And so we need people to be able to manage themselves to a certain degree. So we aren't a good spot for someone who's still in a high acuity place. But for someone who has stabilized in some way, we're a great place to come and enhance the skills that people have to manage whatever challenge it is that has sort of derailed their lives. And so I'm just trying to think. We work with people with diagnoses from everything, psychotic illness, bipolar, depression, PTSD, and we, are a great place for people to begin to practice being in community, being in relationship with other people, dealing with the trials and tribulations of what that means, right. How to deal with emotions when, things are disappointing or not great. So you want to add to that?
No, I think you really touched on the points of what it means to come here. I think again, just to sort of go back to something Jane said earlier, one of the things that's really different about Gould Farm is that the staff and our core of volunteers, we have about 8 to 10 full-time volunteers who dedicate a year of time to be here as well. We all live here. So we really share our lives together, from, babies and, games of peekaboo at the dinner table to, to holiday celebrations and, Halloween, we all open up our houses and we do trick-or-treating and we all dress up and we have costume contests. I mean, we go all out. And so there's a way in which, again, this is a place where people can connect with community in ways that feel comfortable and supportive and supported, and there's no way to avoid it. So it's really important to understand that this is a program that it requires of folks a little something different than your usual kind of clinical program with lots of groups and that kind of formalized structure. This is a little different.
As you were talking about the group leaders, I'm also thinking about the individual clinician, those people with formal clinical training, and they've got to be different. Coming there. No, and I mean that in the best possible way.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I know from my own experience, when I got into school, I've talked about this before. I knew I wanted to focus on trauma, and when I was in graduate school, it was all about what all this education I felt I needed to just shove into me. Yep. And it really wasn't until I started working in this clinic I mentioned where I understood what it means to connect, and how, yes, that education is important, but it's also about me being able to be a human being.
Yes.
Now, you're also talking about, it's not just one clinician working with one person and they're doing all the work, right? They're responsible for this person's healing. So with that as a little bit of background, what type of people are you looking for as clinicians?
Well, you picked on the right word, unique. Because, how would I explain it? The clinical team here has to have a really eclectic bag of tricks. They also have to be well-versed in trauma. There's no one that comes here that hasn't been traumatized by the illness, let alone whatever may have been the things that came before. The family has been traumatized as well, so they are working with that. So that setup alone says they have to have an impeccable understanding of boundaries. And then we bring them into a community and ask them to drop some of them because, unlike a milieu or, some other kind of residential setting, we live and work together. So there's no illusion of neutrality or of sort of the blank face. In other words, we're not sharing our immediate passions and trials and tribulations, but we are authentic in our responses. Part of the reason that we use reflective teams is to enable us to talk about our thinking process in front of a guest, so that that becomes a little more transparent. That asks a lot of a clinician, because the clinician is also, first and foremost is the advocate for the guest, but then has to sit and sort of absorb and think about all the other points of view in the room, which can be very varied.
Right.
I might work with somebody who I have a great therapeutic relationship with, who unfortunately will not get out of bed to go to work. That's going to bring other voices and other perspectives into the room. And it's an art to be able to manage the feelings involved with that, but also to manage all of the different aspects and to help those impact a guest in a way that can forward their movement.
I would also say, Guy, that the clinicians here are called to a kind of mutuality in the work and the relationship with their colleagues as a part of a team where, at any given moment, they're called upon for their expertise in mental health. And the next moment, they may be calling on someone else's expertise in whatever the issue might be. And there's a kind of both empowering and humbling nature to being a part of the staff here, where we learn how to rely on each other and hold each other and support each other in such a myriad of ways that it can be confusing at times, and also again, really, I think, growth inspiring. For lack of a better way to describe it, we're all constantly learning from each other and teaching one another, and it's really quite remarkable.
Awesome. This is amazing. I mean, it really is beautiful what you guys are doing. It really reminds me of the work that I was doing with the clinic, working at the clinic. It's so inspiring to hear this. It really is. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, this is why I love doing this podcast. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure. The easiest ways are either by website. You can find all of our contact information, www.gouldfarm.org, or by phone. Our general number is 413-528-1804. And there's lots of opportunities to learn more about what we do, become involved, come and become a resident here and join the program or join the staff or come and visit. We welcome visitors. Hospitality is really at the core of who we are and what we do here. Awesome. We'll feed you well.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was awesome.
No, Guy, thank you. Thanks for having a wonderful podcast that opens up these opportunities to learn from each other and grow in the good work that's so important. Thanks, Guy.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.